Hi guys, I'm Vic here from PhoneArena. Now, I know that you know that this is the iPhone 13 Pro, but what I didn't know was that not many people are that excited about Apple's 13th lineup. Or at least, that's what I found some people on Reddit to claim. But this kind of opens up something a lot of us have had on the back of our heads for a while now. New phones don't really improve on that much in order to make them worth the buy every year. Many news websites and Statista, one of the popular statistics websites, also seem to support that. With that in mind, I decided to see one of the main features of a phone, its camera, and how it improves over 4 generations, and if it's really worth upgrading your phone. This is why I have the iPhone 13 Pro, the 12 Pro Max, 11 Pro Max, and XS here with me. Let's have a look at their specs first though. We can see an obvious jump in camera numbers from the XS to the 11 Pro Max, but from there onwards we need a direct comparison to know what is better and what isn't. I went out to take some nice shots, but just like in my previous video, I was met with a cold shower. Nevertheless, I still got some good shots for you guys. My first stop was a pretty neat fountain. At a glance, all iPhones are pretty comparable, but you'll probably notice that the XS is a bit blurry. It's especially noticeable if you zoom in. Color-wise though, there's not much of a difference as expected. The 11 Pro Max is also a bit soft on the building at the back as expected, since it does sport quite close to the same sensor as the XS, while the 12 Pro Max and 13 Pro do a really similar job. If I had the 12 Pro Max, I honestly wouldn't even consider upgrading just for the regular camera itself, but let's have a look at this one with our telephoto lens, just in case. There have been some improvements here if I had to be honest. For starters, the XS and 11 Pro Max can't seem to zoom as much. And the 11th Gen seemed to also add some yellow tint here, which is a bit unnatural. The 12 Pro Max does a pretty nice 2.5 times zoom. It's not as magnifying as the 3 times zoom on the 13 Pro, but quality-wise, I'd put them real close. I'd say this is more of a preference, but we do have a noticeable jump from the 11 Pro Max over to the 13 Pro. Still though, I think this scene isn't enough to give us a definitive answer. Let's take a look somewhere else. Maybe at this lion statue. At a glance, the 13 Pro did a bit of an unrealistic color job on the building, but from afar, all iPhones except the XS did a pretty good job. I'm saying that because the building and lion on the XS are rather soft and blurry. I could have written this as being my fault, but it has so far happened on all shots. Furthermore, zooming in a tiny bit more will show us that the 11 Pro Max is ever so slightly softer than the other two left contenders. So, since I didn't really appreciate the 13 Pro's color grading, I'd say that the 12 Pro Max took a surprising win here. I mean, colors can be easily fixed, but even then, the 13 Pro still doesn't seem worth it. Let's have a look at the ultra-wide sensor then. Here, of course, you'll notice how the XS is starting to show its age. The other three managed quite the comparable photos. The 11 Pro Max is a bit soft, but actually better in terms of noise when compared to the 12 Pro Max. It's pretty noticeable in the building's shady corners. The 13 Pro once again did a warmer tone photo, but since I mentioned that this can easily be fixed, I'd say that the sharpness and low noise make it the best in this case. I wouldn't call this scenario upgrade worthy, but the XS is definitely lagging behind, so even moving to an 11th or 12th gen would still be worth it if you like having an ultra-wide camera. The zoom lens on all is once again performing as before. The colors are all sorts of different, which I won't get into, but the XS is once again the last in terms of sharpness and noise. The 13 Pro and 12 Pro Max are pretty comparable once again. Now here's how these bad boys do when we move to a slightly worse scene. I tried zooming in to see how the 13 Pro and 12 Pro Max would crush the rest, but interestingly the 11 Pro Max held its ground. The XS though failed miserably. Its image is a blurry mess. I mean, sure, it's perfectly fine for uploading on social media, but if you're aiming for quality, it shouldn't be your first choice. Maybe the 11 Pro Max might be a tiny bit worse noise-wise, but it's so minor that I'd rather ignore it. What about the 13 Pro's new macro mode then? Well, let's have a look. Honestly, it's actually not bad. I'm not sure if I'd call this the most useful feature ever, but I can't deny that it managed to capture the closest shot out of all devices. The XS is a bit blurry on this one as expected, and I used the telephoto camera on it as I did on the 11 and 12 Pro Max. The results on the 11 Pro Max and 12 are actually pretty comparable, and I'd say that for most people this is as close as they'll need to take photos. Switching over to the image of a flower shows the same result, so I'm calling this a case confirmed. The macro mode is indeed working as intended and is better than just a telephoto camera, but I'm unsure if it was really necessary. By the way, I did also take some portrait shots just to see how that goes. Regarding my first image, I'd say that 3 out of 4 devices did a photo finish, pun intended. The XS is substantially worse with more noise and less light captured under my umbrella, while the others did a very similar job in terms of sharpness, colors and bokeh. I wouldn't call this an upgrade necessity too. What about night portraits though? Well, this one is even more interesting. In extremely dark conditions, the XS did a miserable job, while the 11 and 12 Pro Max did an okay job. But the 13 Pro went a step further and managed to capture more of the light in my face. Of course, if it wasn't that dark, all of the phones managed to capture enough details for an, usable image, and you won't make out as many differences as before, except in the XS. I know I might sound like a broken record by now, but I just like being honest. The XS is indeed quite behind the rest of the phones when it comes to its camera performance. Since we did see quite a bit more difference in the dark, why not check out some night photography then? Quite a bit of walking around in rain before it finally turned dark, but suppose you want to take a shot of a dim-lit street. Well, I can assure you that all phones should do this job fine, but sadly the 11 Pro Max and XS won't be making my cut. They're slightly more blurry than the other two devices and look worse in general. Of course, you wouldn't be able to say that the 11 Pro Max is that bad if you don't zoom in, so I'd say this is perfectly fine to use, but the XS bad performance you can see from afar. Its photo is noticeably darker and muddy. I'd say that the 12 Pro Max and 13 Pro did an equal performance here though, even their lens flare is identical. The telephoto results are surprisingly surprising. As we already know, the 13 Pro's new telephoto camera, which offers 3 times zoom instead of the 2.5 times of the 12 Pro Max, is also less capable of capturing as much light. Due to that fact, we're seeing less brightness of the Pro's image, while the 11 Pro Max and 12 Pro Max did better. The XS is once again disappointing, but quite usable. Doing ultra-wide shots is a different story though. I think that this might be one of the biggest improvements to the camera this time around. The 13 Pro captured more light and remained sharper than the 11 Pro Max and 12 Pro Max. This is probably also the only scenario where you can, with a degree of certainty, order the performance of these phones by their release date. Props to Apple, but also still not enough reason to upgrade if I was coming from the 12 Pro Max, so you have that. In case the first image didn't convince you though, here's one where you can see the life-gathering difference even better. Now, an area where these phones haven't really budged all that much is in the selfie camera. Given enough light, all of the phones managed to produce a similar image. The XS doesn't seem to have a wide selfie mode, but I'll let that one slide. The video performance was also cool to see. The XS obviously did bad and had a bit of a focusing issue to the side, plus it doesn't really have a wide camera. The 11 Pro Max was also interesting. It couldn't really switch to its wide camera on the fly, and its electronic stabilization seemed to blur the trees on every step. Furthermore, if you did decide to record with the ultra-wide camera, you could then switch to a 1x or 2.5 times zoom, but the quality would be coming from the ultra-wide camera, which was really odd. The 12 Pro Max is better in that regard though, and I can say with ease that it's pretty equal to the 13 Pro. But the 13 Pro does have the all-new famous cinematic mode, but I wouldn't say that it's a game changer for most people. But for those that really want to use it and need it, it's really freaking cool. So I think that pretty much sums up the camera performance between these devices. Honestly, I wouldn't spend cash on the 13 Pro if I was coming from the 11 Pro Max or 12 Pro Max especially, but the XS is really showing its age, with focusing issues and more noise in general. Of course, the 11 Pro Max had noticeably worse performance, but I can live with that. What about you guys though? Would you upgrade to the iPhone 13 lineup, or why wouldn't you? Let me know down in the comments below, please subscribe, and I'll see you guys some other time.